Hello, my name is Pastor Russ Foust. I'm pastor at Grace United Methodist Church in Kennard, Nebraska. And this is the message for Sunday, July 5th, 2020, which is based on Matthew 11, 16 through 19, and 25 through 30. I hope you enjoy it. It contains a lot of ideas, and I hope that I can get you to think about some of those themes, but you might have to go back and reread the passage and do some thinking on your own, which is what you should do. Anyhow, don't just rely on my words and my ideas. At the beginning of the text, Jesus was speaking to a crowd which contained some disciples of John the Baptist. They were passing a question on from John, who was in prison at the time. They were asking whether Jesus was indeed the Messiah. And Jesus made sure that John's disciples returned to him with an answer that told them that Jesus was indeed the one who John recognized him to be. And Jesus continued to say how great of a man John the Baptist was. But it seems that there were some critics who were just never satisfied with anything that Jesus said or did. Isn't that the way of some people? Just to constantly complain. As named by Jesus, that complaining generation, they hammered on John the Baptist because he ate minimally and drank no alcohol. Critics said that he had to be plagued by a demon. On the other hand, when Jesus ate, sometimes with sinners, they called him a glutton. When he drank, they called him a drunkard. It seemed that they lived to find fault with anything and everything Jesus did. I had a boss like that. He was never satisfied with any of my projects. In his opinion, they always took too long, or they were too expensive, or they were just not good. There seemed to be little I could do to dissuade him of his and other managers' predetermined opinion of me, as he was revered to be an engineering god by those plant managers. The fact was, none of his projects were really true successes, and many were total failures. But as he had many who worked for him, in those cases where it was a failure, that responsibility for the failure was shifted to some lower-level engineer who always seemed to leave the company for one reason or another. Not to brag, but the projects I worked on went to save the company literally millions of dollars. Now, given this admittedly one-sided discussion of my employers, Jesus' words in the last sentence of verse 19 makes me feel vindicated, as my projects were successful and my bosses were not. Jesus says, "But wisdom is shown to be right by its results." I do believe that time will distinguish whose contributions are worthwhile and whose decay with time. Power, prestige, and wealth, these things we seem to value so much in life, in reality have no ongoing worth. Our efforts are quickly forgotten. In truth, everything on earth does belong to God. So why not work in something valued by God in the first place? That being love. If you want to make a difference, put your efforts in projects that show others your love of God. But back to Jesus' complaint about the people, not only discounting his ideas, but just plain refusing to listen to them. It seemed like it was understood before he even began to speak by some that there was just no way his words could lead to anything of value. With the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the decision had been made to discredit him in any way possible, regardless of how wise or truthful the words were that he spoke. They refused to listen because they were 100% certain that their way was the one and only true way. But you and I both know they were wrong. Another person in history who suffered when he got crosswise with his boss was Galileo Galilei, who lived from 1564 to 1642. And he was a man who espoused the idea of a sun-centered solar system. And this opposed the model the church endorsed, which held that the earth was at the center of the universe, and everything else revolved around it. Galileo's writings on the subject were eventually submitted to the Spanish Inquisition for review, and they claimed that Galileo and his followers were attempting to reinterpret the value, as if the church had the only total and complete understanding of the solar system. Doesn't this sound a bit like the Pharisees' and Sadducees' claims against Jesus? They claimed that Jesus didn't have a clue because what he said didn't fall in line with what they were thinking or doing. And as it turned out, they, the high and mighty priests, were the ones without a clue. Jesus was right. Wisdom is shown to be right by its results. Now back to Galileo, the Pope imprisoned the scientist in the form of a house arrest and told him that he had to abandon the notion that the sun stands still at the center of the universe in every manner possible, including written and oral ways. He was forced under threat of excommunication as well as torture to recant his theory that the earth moved around the sun. He eventually spoke the words which were forced upon his lips. However, popular legend says that he quickly added the words under his breath, "and yet it moves." I like his rebellious attitude. Even in the face of total imposed authority, he still refused to totally yield to falsehoods. And of course we know that he was right. Another case of wisdom is shown to be right by its results. I have been accused of having a small passion to prove that I am right. Debbie, my wife, may consider the phrase small passion to be somewhat of an understatement. I won't enter into a debate about that right now, but as I grow older with Jesus, I have learned to consider different ideas, even if they go against what I believe to be correct. There are fewer and fewer things in this world of which my confidence is 100% certain. I like to think that I am getting wiser, for wisdom requires us to remove our petty sense of having to be right when confronted with an idea that appears to fly in the face of our beliefs. And you see, this was the problem of the Jewish leaders of the day. They were so sure and so consumed with the efforts that it took to live in the structure of laws and rules that they had created, their burden was huge. And as the religious leaders of the people, they similarly imposed huge workloads and responsibility upon those churchgoers as well. There was a massive amount of resources that were committed to adhere to rules that just didn't mean anything. They had a heavy burden just trying to live within those laws. And today, are we really that much different? Our burdens may have changed. They may involve more technology, but in most cases, aren't they really still overwhelming? Aren't we still struggling to cope and handle with a lot of things that really don't make a lot of difference? Jesus tells us, "Come to me, all of you who are weak and weary and who carry heavy burdens." He is calling not only to those who lived in his day, but to you and me as well. He promises to give us rest, and rest could come in so many forms. It's the rest that we should take off on the Lord's day. It's the rest that we can get from backing off of our pressing work responsibilities. It's the rest that can be from the pressure of enemies in times of war or disagreement when we just back off. Rest can be the weight of living in sin in all of its forms. Rest can be the ultimate rescue from death as well. Jesus instructs us to take my yoke upon you. He says it's easy to bear, and the burden Jesus gives us is light. He says that he's a kind-hearted and gentle teacher. Try his way and take on his yoke. I find it interesting that Jesus uses the analogy of a yoke, for it means something of harnessing the power of a brute. It means to take the work done by an animal and use it to be controlled by a master to provide a good. When we make the decision to take on the yoke of Jesus, it requires an ongoing commitment to live a more responsible and righteous life, to work for God, our master, instead of selfishly laboring for only our own good. But Jesus' yoke is not simply another workload with which we have to struggle. It has immediate rewards as well. Jesus promises that if we come to him, he will give us rest. He will take our burdens from our shoulders, those problems and encumbrances that weigh us down so much that we lose sight of what's really important. Jesus can help to get rid of all that junk in our lives that doesn't matter. Slavery to sin, excessive demands made by others, and so many other pressures which we struggle with in our everyday lives. And when we finally fail because of that crushing weight, we often lash out at others in anger. Anger blinds us. Its rage makes us react without thinking, and the feelings we feel afterward only work to drive us further away from our loved ones and God. We need less pressure. Jesus' calming influence can greatly diminish these negative aspects of life. Through studying and then implementing his principles, following Jesus will lead to a much more joyful and contented life as we learn to let go of anger. And for those tasks that remain, remember the yoke allows for two to labor at the same time, pulling in the same direction. For Jesus will be there right beside you when you're working for God. Today's gospel lesson has a lot of things to consider. Regardless of whether someone of power considers you to be a valuable person or not, you can make a positive, valuable difference when you keep your values intact and listen to your convictions. Remember to be willing to consider new and unusual ideas as they are presented to you. It may just be the tip of a new iceberg of understanding and wisdom. And mostly, take up Jesus' yoke. Let him work with you in a new direction. For as I said, there are usually two places in a yoke. He's a great partner for life and beyond.